The lawyer's voice cracked the silence of the room like a whip. 30 days, he said again, as if Elena Ashworth had not heard him the first time. If you do not marry within 30 days of this reading, the entire estate passes to the church, and you will receive nothing. Elena sat frozen in the tall leather chair, her black mourning dress suddenly feeling too tight around her throat. Around her, the old study of her grandfather still smelled of pipe smoke and old paper, as if he might walk in at any moment and laugh at the shock on her face. But he would not walk in. He was gone, and he had left her this strange, cruel gift disguised as an inheritance. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My grandfather would never do something like this to me." Mr. Whitfield, the family lawyer, folded his hands over the papers in front of him. He was an old man with kind eyes, but today those eyes carried only sympathy, not hope. "I am afraid there is no mistake, Miss Ashworth. Your grandfather was very clear. He wanted to see you settled before he passed. He worried what would happen to you, and to this house, and to the people who depend on it, if you remained alone." Elena's hands tightened in her lap. She thought of the estate outside the window, the wide green fields, the small cottages where families had lived for generations working the land. She thought of old Mrs. Doyle, who ran the kitchen, and her 2 grandchildren, who lived in the gardener's cottage. She thought of Tom, the stable boy, who had nowhere else to go. If she lost this house, she would not just be losing walls and land, she would be losing all of them too. 30 days, she whispered again, testing the words on her tongue, as if that might make them less impossible. 30 days, Mr. Whitfield confirmed gently. "I am sorry, my dear. I tried to talk him out of this condition many times. He was a stubborn man, God rest him. But he loved you very much. He simply believed that a woman alone in this world faces too many storms. He wanted you protected." Elena wanted to laugh, though nothing about this felt funny. Protected, as if marriage to a stranger, forced upon her in 30 days like a sentence handed down in a courtroom, was protection. She had spent years building a quiet, independent life. She managed her own small allowance, read books late into the night without needing anyone's permission, and had turned away more than one suitor because she refused to marry simply for the sake of being married. Now here she was, trapped by a dead man's love, forced to find a husband faster than most people found a new pair of shoes. She left the lawyer's office in a daze, walking out into the cool afternoon air. The estate grounds stretched before her, the trees just beginning to turn gold with the coming autumn. She had always loved this view. Today it felt like a countdown clock. Her cousin Charlotte was waiting by the carriage, her face full of worry the moment she saw Elena's expression. "What happened? You look like you have seen a ghost." Elena climbed into the carriage without a word, waiting until the door was closed and they were moving before she spoke. "Grandfather's will says I must marry within 30 days, or we lose everything. The house, the land, all of it goes to the church." Charlotte's mouth fell open. 30 days? Elena, that is madness. Nobody finds a husband in 30 days unless... She stopped herself, but Elena already knew what she meant to say. "Unless it is an arrangement," Elena finished for her. "A business deal, not a marriage." Charlotte reached over and took her cousin's hand. "Then we shall find you a good arrangement. There is no shame in it. Half of society marries this way, Elena. You simply need someone practical. Someone who wants the same thing you do. A comfortable life, an heir perhaps, and nothing more complicated than that." Elena stared out the window at the passing fields, her mind spinning through every eligible man she had ever met, and rejecting each one just as quickly. There was Lord Pembroke, who talked endlessly about his hunting dogs. There was young Mr. Ellery, who had proposed to 3 different women in one season. There was Sir Aldous, twice her age and twice as loud. None of them felt right. None of them felt safe. "I do not know anyone suitable," Elena said quietly. "Not anyone I would trust with my home, my people, my whole life." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, chewing her lip the way she always did when an idea was forming. Finally she said, "There is one name. I hesitate to even say it, because everyone in town whispers about him. But he is unmarried, he is titled, and from what I hear, he has no interest in society games or gossip. He simply wants to be left alone." "Who?" "The Duke of Frostmere." Elena blinked. She had heard the name before. always spoken in hushed, careful tones, as if saying it too loudly might summon something unpleasant. Damian Blackwood, Duke of Frostmere, was known throughout the county as a cold, distant man who rarely left his estate and never attended balls or dinners unless duty demanded it. Some called him heartless. Others whispered darker things, that his first wife had died under strange circumstances, and that he had never forgiven himself, or perhaps had something to hide. "They say many things," Charlotte replied. "But think about it, Elena. He does not want love. He does not want society's approval. From what I understand, he needs an heir for his title, nothing more. It could be exactly the kind of arrangement you need. No expectations of affection. No pretending at romance. Simply two people solving two problems." Elena turned the idea over in her mind as the carriage rolled on. It sounded almost too practical to be real, and yet, what other choice did she have? 30 days was no time at all to find warmth in courtship, but it might be enough time to find an agreement. That evening, alone in her room, Elena sat by the window with her grandfather's old letters spread across her lap. She read through them one more time, searching for some explanation, some softness behind his impossible demand. In one letter, written months before his passing, he had written something that made her chest tighten. "My dear Elena, I fear leaving you alone, in a world that is not always kind to women who stand by themselves. I do this not to cage you, but to be certain someone strong stands beside you when I no longer can." She folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Perhaps he had meant well. Perhaps, in his old-fashioned way, this was his last act of love. But it did not change the fact that she now had less than a month to secure her future, and the safest path forward seemed to lead directly to the coldest man in the county. The next morning, Elena woke before dawn, her decision already made somewhere deep inside her, even before her mind had fully agreed to it. She dressed quickly and quietly, choosing a simple gray traveling dress instead of anything meant to impress. This was not a courtship. This was a negotiation, and she intended to present herself as exactly that, a woman who meant business. Charlotte tried to stop her at the door. "You cannot simply arrive at his estate uninvited and unannounced. It is not proper." "I do not have time for proper," Elena said, pulling on her gloves. "I have 29 days left, Charlotte. I cannot wait for invitations and introductions and the slow dance of society. If I am going to do this, I must do it directly." Charlotte sighed, clearly torn between worry and admiration. "Then at least let me come with you." "No," Elena said gently. "If this fails, I do not want anyone to witness my humiliation. Let me go alone." The journey to Frostmere took nearly 3 hours by carriage, winding through narrower and colder roads the further north they traveled. The trees here seemed taller, darker, closing in over the path like a tunnel. By the time the carriage rolled to a stop, Elena could see the estate rising in the distance, a great stone structure with tall towers and narrow windows, looking every bit as unwelcoming as its owner's reputation suggested. Frost clung to the edges of the windows even though autumn had barely begun, as if the house itself refused to let warmth inside. Elena stepped down from the carriage, smoothing her skirts and steadying her breathing. She had faced difficult moments before, but never quite like this. Never with so much resting on a single conversation with a man she had never met. A butler answered the heavy front door, his expression polite, but clearly startled by the unannounced visitor. "May I help you, miss?" "I am here to see the Duke," Elena said, keeping her voice calm and firm. "My name is Elena Ashworth. I understand he does not receive visitors without notice, but my business is urgent, and I believe he will want to hear what I have to say." The butler hesitated, clearly unsure what to do with such a direct request. After a long pause, he stepped aside. "Please wait in the drawing room. I will see if His Grace is available." The drawing room was as cold and formal as the rest of the house appeared from outside. Dark wood furniture, heavy curtains pulled halfway closed, and not a single flower or bright color anywhere in sight. Elena stood near the window rather than sitting, too restless to settle into stillness. She watched frost patterns creep along the glass and wondered, not for the first time, if she was making a terrible mistake. Nearly 20 minutes passed before the door opened again, and this time, it was not the butler who entered. Damian Blackwood was taller than Elena expected, with dark hair and sharp features that seemed carved rather than born. His eyes were a pale, striking gray, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. though she forced herself to hold her ground. He wore simple, dark clothing, nothing like the elaborate fashions worn by other noblemen she had met. There was no warmth in his expression, no curiosity, nothing but quiet, controlled patience. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice low and even. "I understand you have urgent business with me, though I cannot imagine what that might be, given we have never been introduced." Elena straightened her spine, refusing to let his coldness shake her resolve. "Forgive my intrusion, Your Grace. I would not have come uninvited, if my circumstances allowed for patience. My grandfather passed recently, and his will contains a condition I must fulfill within 30 days, or I lose my family's entire estate and everyone who depends upon it." Something flickered briefly in his gray eyes, though it vanished so quickly Elena almost doubted she had seen it. "And what condition might that be?" "I must marry," Elena said plainly, "within 30 days, to anyone suitable." The Duke's expression did not change, but he tilted his head slightly, as though reconsidering the woman standing before him. "And you have come to me because you believe I am suitable?" "I have come to you," Elena said carefully, "because I believe we might want the same thing, a practical arrangement. Nothing more complicated than that." For a long moment, the Duke said nothing at all. He simply studied her, his gaze unreadable, while the fire in the hearth crackled softly behind him. Elena forced herself not to look away, not to fidget, not to reveal how much courage this conversation was costing her. "You are very direct, Miss Ashworth," he finally said. "Most women who come to Frostmere come seeking sympathy, or gossip, or simply to satisfy their curiosity about the man society calls cold and cruel. You have come seeking a contract. I do not have the luxury of time for anything else, Your Grace." A faint, almost invisible shift crossed his features. Not quite a smile, but something close to respect. "Sit down, Miss Ashworth. Let us discuss this properly." Elena sat, her heart pounding beneath her calm exterior, unsure whether she had just found her salvation, or walked willingly into something far more complicated than she understood. The Duke remained standing near the fireplace, his gray eyes distant, as though weighing decisions far beyond the conversation at hand. "I will not pretend to offer you affection," he said finally. "I have none left to give, and I suspect you would not want it even if I did. But I require an heir, and my title demands a wife. If you are prepared to accept a marriage without warmth, without pretense of love, I am prepared to consider your proposal." Elena swallowed hard, surprised by how quickly the conversation had turned real. "And in return? Your estate remains yours," he said, "untouched, unclaimed by anyone but you, and whatever children we may have. You will want for nothing here, but do not mistake this arrangement for anything softer than what it is. I am not a man capable of gentleness, Miss Ashworth. I would rather you understand that now, before either of us commits to something neither can undo." Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for some sign of cruelty, some proof of the dark rumors she had heard whispered about him. She found none, only a deep guarded weariness, as though he had built walls so high around himself that even he had forgotten what lay behind them. "I understand," she said quietly. "I am not seeking gentleness either, Your Grace. I am seeking survival, for myself and for those who depend on me. If that is a foundation you can accept, then perhaps we have found exactly what we both need." The Duke studied her a moment longer, then gave the smallest nod, as though sealing something far heavier than words could carry. "Then we are agreed," he said. "I will have my lawyer draw the necessary papers immediately. We do not have time to waste, given your deadline." Elena rose from her chair, her legs unsteady beneath her skirts, though her voice remained composed. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Do not thank me yet," he said, turning toward the window, his gaze fixed on the frost-covered gardens beyond the glass. "You may come to regret this arrangement more than you regret losing your estate." Elena left Frostmere that afternoon, with a strange, hollow feeling settling in her chest, somewhere between relief and dread. She had found her solution. She had secured her family's future, her people's safety, everything her grandfather had feared losing. And yet, as the carriage rolled away from the tall stone towers and disappearing frost-covered windows, she could not shake the feeling that she had just made a promise to a man built entirely of secrets, and that those secrets were only beginning to stir. The wedding was arranged with the same cold efficiency that seemed to govern every part of Damien Blackwood's life. Within a week, papers were signed, a date was set, and a small chapel near Frostmere was chosen for the ceremony. There would be no grand celebration, no dancing, no crowd of well-wishers tossing flowers, just two people fulfilling a contract, dressed in the clothing of a wedding. Elena stood in front of the mirror on the morning of her wedding day, staring at her own reflection as if trying to recognize herself. Charlotte stood behind her, carefully pinning the last few strands of Elena's hair into place. Her face tight with worry, she was trying hard not to show. "You do not have to do this," Charlotte said quietly. "We could find another way. There must be another way." "There is no other way," Elena replied, smoothing the front of her pale blue dress. It was simple, elegant, nothing like the elaborate gowns other brides wore. She had chosen it deliberately, wanting nothing about this day to feel like a fairy tale she did not believe in. In 22 days, the estate would have belonged to the church. Now it belongs to me, to us, to everyone who depends on it. This is the right choice, Charlotte. Even if it does not feel like the choice I imagined for myself. Charlotte's eyes glistened, though she blinked the tears away quickly. "I only wanted you to marry for love one day, not for survival." Elena turned and took her cousin's hands, squeezing them gently. "Perhaps survival is its own kind of love, in its own strange way. I am protecting the people who matter to me. That has to count for something." The carriage ride to the chapel felt endless and instant all at once, Elena's mind racing through 1,000 thoughts, while the scenery blurred past, unnoticed. When they arrived, the small stone chapel stood quiet and nearly empty, holding only a handful of witnesses required by law. Mr. Whitfield stood near the front, along with a few Frostmere staff members Elena did not recognize, and Charlotte, who took her seat with a trembling smile. Damien was already waiting at the altar when Elena entered, dressed in dark formal clothing that made him look even more severe than usual. His expression remained unreadable as she walked toward him, his gray eyes following her every step, though nothing in his face revealed what he might be thinking or feeling. The ceremony itself was brief, almost businesslike in its simplicity. The priest spoke the required words, and Elena and Damien repeated their vows in steady, even voices, neither of them faltering, neither of them showing anything close to the emotion such words were meant to carry. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, there was no joyful embrace, no lingering kiss meant to seal a love story. Damien simply took her hand, his grip firm but distant, and led her back down the aisle, as a married couple bound by paper rather than passion. Outside the chapel, a light rain had begun to fall, gray clouds pressing low over the hills. Elena climbed into the carriage beside her new husband, the silence between them heavier than the weather outside. She glanced at him, searching for something to say, some way to break the strange, uncomfortable quiet that had settled between two strangers now legally bound together for life. "Thank you," she finally said, "for agreeing to this arrangement." Damien's gaze remained fixed on the passing scenery outside the window. "You need not thank me, Duchess. We have both gained something we required. Gratitude is unnecessary between business partners." The word Duchess struck Elena strangely, foreign and heavy, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. She looked down at the plain gold band now resting on her finger, feeling the full weight of what she had just done settle over her like the rain outside. She was married now, truly, legally married, to a man she barely knew, whose past held secrets she had not yet begun to understand. The carriage ride to Frostmere felt longer than her first visit, the silence between them stretching uncomfortably with each passing mile. Elena tried once or twice to start conversation, asking about the estate, the staff, the surrounding villages, but each attempt was met with brief, polite answers that discouraged any further discussion. By the time they arrived at the tall stone gates of Frostmere, Elena had given up trying to fill the silence and simply watched the darkening sky instead. The staff gathered to greet them upon arrival, a long line of servants standing stiffly outside the grand front doors despite the light rain still falling. Elena recognized the butler from her first visit, along with a stern-faced housekeeper whose sharp eyes studied Elena with open suspicion rather than welcome. "Welcome home, Your Grace," the housekeeper said, addressing Damien first, before turning her attention reluctantly toward Elena. "And welcome to Frostmere, my lady." "Thank you," Elena said, offering a warm smile despite the chill radiating from the woman's expression. "I look forward to knowing you all better." The housekeeper, whose name Elena would later learn was Mrs. Pemberton, offered only a stiff nod before turning to lead the way inside, her posture rigid with something that felt very much like disapproval. Elena followed, glancing briefly at Damien, who walked ahead without a backward look, already retreating into whatever private world he inhabited behind those cold gray eyes. The inside of Frostmere felt even larger and colder than Elena remembered from her first visit. Long, dim hallways stretched in every direction, lined with portraits of stern ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow her as she passed. Heavy curtains blocked most of the natural light, and despite fires burning in several hearths, a persistent chill seemed to cling to the very stones of the house. Mrs. Pemberton led Elena to a large bedroom on the second floor, decorated in muted blues and grays, tasteful, but utterly without warmth or personality. "This will be your chamber, my lady," the housekeeper said. "His Grace's chamber is at the end of the hall, should you require anything of him." The implication was clear enough. Separate rooms, separate lives, sharing only a house and a title, nothing more intimate than that. Elena nodded, keeping her expression carefully neutral despite the strange hollow feeling growing in her chest. That evening, dinner was served in a dining room so large that Elena and Damien sat at opposite ends of a long table, their voices required to carry an unnecessary distance simply to hold conversation. The meal was served in near silence, broken only by quiet, formal remarks about the weather, the roads, and other harmless topics that filled space without truly connecting them. "You need not force conversation for my benefit," Damien finally said, partway through the meal, setting down his fork. "I understand this arrangement was born from necessity, not desire. You need not pretend otherwise." Elena studied him for a long moment before responding. "I am not pretending, Your Grace. I am simply trying to understand the man I have married. Is that so unreasonable?" Something flickered across his face again, that same brief, unreadable shadow she had noticed during their first meeting. "Understanding requires time, Duchess. I am not accustomed to sharing myself with anyone. I would ask for patience, if patience is something you are willing to offer." "I can offer patience," Elena said quietly. "I only ask that you do not mistake my patience for weakness, or my curiosity for something you need to guard against." Damien's gray eyes held hers for a long, unreadable moment, before he finally looked away, returning his attention to his meal without further comment. Elena took that as answer enough for one evening, and allowed the silence to settle comfortably enough between them for the remainder of dinner. After the meal, Damien excused himself to his study, citing estate business that required his immediate attention. Elena watched him disappear down the long hallway, his tall figure swallowed quickly by shadow, before she turned and made her way toward her own quiet chamber. The first night of her marriage stretching ahead of her, cold and unfamiliar. She undressed slowly, her mind replaying the day's events again and again, the wedding, the silence, the strange, guarded man she had bound herself to. She climbed into the large, unfamiliar bed, staring up at the dark ceiling above her, listening to the wind pressing against the windows outside. Somewhere down the hall, she imagined Damien sitting alone in his study, perhaps staring at papers he was not truly reading, carrying whatever burdens kept him locked so tightly behind his cold exterior. Elena closed her eyes, exhaustion finally pulling her toward sleep despite the strangeness surrounding her. She had saved her home. She had saved the people who depended on her. Whatever came next, whatever secrets Frostmere and its master still held, she had at least secured that much. It would have to be enough, for now. Morning came slowly, gray light creeping through the heavy curtains of her new chamber. Elena rose and dressed simply, then made her way downstairs, uncertain what her new life as Duchess of Frostmere would require of her. She found the breakfast room nearly empty, only a single place set at the table, a note resting beside the plate. She unfolded the note carefully, recognizing Damien's sharp, precise handwriting. "Estate matters require my attention in the northern fields today. Mrs. Pemberton will show you the house and grounds. Please feel free to make whatever changes you see fit to your own chamber. The rest of the house remains as it has always been." Elena set the note aside, a small, strange disappointment settling in her chest that she quickly pushed away. She had not expected warmth. She had not expected companionship. And yet some small, foolish part of her had hoped, perhaps, for something more than an empty chair and a hastily written note. Mrs. Pemberton arrived shortly after, offering a brief, businesslike tour of the house that revealed little beyond cold facts and practical information. The library, the drawing room, the east wing, currently closed for repairs. The kitchens, the servants' quarters, the gardens, overgrown and neglected despite their obvious potential for beauty. The gardens have not been tended properly in years, Elena observed, studying the tangled, wild growth beyond the windows. His Grace has little interest in gardens, my lady, Mrs. Pemberton replied stiffly. Not since. She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together as though catching herself before revealing something she should not. Not since what? Elena asked gently. Mrs. Pemberton's expression closed like a shutting door. It is not my place to discuss such matters, my lady. If you require further information, I suggest you address His Grace directly. Elena did not push further, though the housekeeper's sudden reluctance only deepened her curiosity. Something had happened here, something significant enough that even the household staff still carried its weight years later. Something connected, perhaps, to the portraits of the late Duchess that Elena had noticed hanging throughout the halls, her painted eyes calm and distant, watching over a house that had grown cold in her absence. As the tour continued, Elena found herself drawn again and again to those portraits, studying the face of the woman who had once occupied the position Elena now held. Isabel Blackwood had been beautiful, with warm brown eyes and a soft, gentle smile that seemed at odds with the cold, silent house surrounding her painted image. Elena wondered what had happened to bring such warmth into contact with such coldness, and what had ultimately taken that warmth away entirely. She was very beautiful, Elena said quietly, standing before the largest portrait in the main hallway. Mrs. Pemberton's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion Elena had seen cross the woman's face since her arrival. She was, my lady. The house was different when she was here. Warmer, somehow, despite everything. What happened to her? Elena asked gently. Mrs. Pemberton's expression closed again just as quickly as it had opened. That is a story for His Grace to tell, my lady, should he choose to tell it. It is not mine to share. With that, she turned and continued the tour, leaving Elena staring after the portrait a moment longer, questions multiplying faster than she could organize them. That night, dinner passed much as it had the evening before, quiet and formal, filled with careful, harmless conversation that revealed nothing beneath the surface. Elena studied her husband carefully throughout the meal, noting the small ways his composure seemed to waver whenever conversation drifted too close to certain topics, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly whenever silence stretched too long between them. I noticed the portraits in the hallway today, Elena said carefully, watching his reaction closely. Damien's fork paused briefly above his plate, before continuing its motion, his expression remaining carefully controlled. Frostmere has many portraits, Duchess. Which one caught your attention? The one of your first wife, Elena said gently. Isabel. The name seemed to hang in the air between them, heavier than anything spoken since their wedding. Damien set down his fork entirely this time, his gray eyes lifting to meet hers, with an intensity that made Elena's breath catch slightly in her throat. That is not a conversation I am prepared to have tonight, he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning edge Elena had not heard from him before. Perhaps not for many nights to come. I would ask you not to press the matter, Duchess. Elena held his gaze steadily, despite the warning in his tone. I do not mean to cause you pain, Your Grace. I only wish to understand the man I have married, and the history that shaped him. Some history is better left buried, Damien said, rising from his chair before the meal had properly concluded. Good night, Duchess. He left the dining room without another word, his tall figure disappearing into the shadowed hallway beyond, leaving Elena alone at the long table, with nothing but unanswered questions, and the quiet, watchful eyes of portraits lining the walls around her. Elena sat alone for several long minutes after his departure, staring down at her half-finished meal, wondering exactly what kind of house she had married into, and what kind of man truly lived behind those cold, guarded gray eyes. Whatever had happened to Isabel Blackwood, it clearly still haunted these halls, still shaped every silence, and every careful word spoken within Frostmere's cold stone walls. Elena rose slowly from the table, determined that whatever secrets this house held, she would eventually uncover them, one careful step at a time, regardless of how tightly her husband guarded the truth. The days at Frostmere settled into a strange, quiet rhythm over the following weeks. Elena rose early each morning, took breakfast alone more often than not, and spent her days exploring the vast estate, while Damien buried himself in work that seemed to multiply endlessly, always keeping him occupied, always keeping him distant. Dinners remained the only time they truly shared each other's company. though even those meals continued in careful, guarded silence, broken occasionally by polite conversation about matters of little consequence. Yet despite the coldness Damien projected so consistently, Elena began noticing small contradictions scattered throughout her days, tiny details that did not fit the image of a heartless, distant man that society had painted so thoroughly. A fire was always lit and waiting in her chamber each evening before she retired, though she never saw who tended to it. Her favorite books, ones she had mentioned only once in passing conversation, began appearing on the shelf in her sitting room, as though someone had gone out of their way to seek them out for her. When a chill wind swept through the halls one particularly cold evening, a warm shawl appeared draped over the back of her chair before dinner, though no one claimed responsibility for placing it there. "Did you bring this for me?" Elena asked Grace, the young maid who had been assigned to assist her, one morning as she noticed a small vase of fresh flowers placed carefully on her windowsill, an unusual touch of color in a house otherwise devoid of such warmth. Grace's cheeks flushed slightly, and she glanced quickly toward the door before answering in a hushed voice. "It was His Grace, my lady. He picks them himself, early in the mornings, before anyone else is awake. He asked that I not mention it, but I thought perhaps you should know." Elena stared at the small vase, something warm and confused stirring in her chest. Why would he hide something so simple as bringing me flowers? Grace hesitated, clearly uncertain how much she should reveal. "His Grace does not like to be seen as anything other than what people expect of him, my lady. I believe he finds it easier that way. Safer, perhaps." "Safer how?" Grace glanced toward the door again before answering quietly. "Forgive me, my lady. I should not gossip about such matters. It is not my place." "Please," Elena said gently. "I only wish to understand my own husband, Grace." "Surely that is not so unreasonable a request." The young maid hesitated a moment longer before finally speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "The last Duchess, my lady. She was warm and open with everyone, always smiling, always kind. And when she died, His Grace changed completely. People began to whisper terrible things about him, things I do not believe are true, but the whispers hurt him deeply all the same. I believe he learned that showing warmth only invites more pain, more suspicion, more cruelty from those around him. So he stopped showing it entirely, except in small, quiet ways that no one is meant to notice." Elena absorbed this information carefully, pieces of a larger puzzle slowly beginning to form a clearer picture in her mind. "Thank you for telling me, Grace. I promise I will not reveal that you shared this with me." Grace nodded gratefully, before hurrying off to continue her duties, leaving Elena alone with the small vase of flowers and a growing curiosity about the man she had married. Whatever cold exterior Damien Blackwood presented to the world, it seemed increasingly clear that something far gentler existed beneath it, carefully hidden away, protected from a world that had once hurt him deeply enough to demand such extreme self-protection. That afternoon, Elena decided to explore the eastern wing of the house, despite Mrs. Pemberton's earlier claim that it remained closed for repairs. Something about the housekeeper's hesitation, whenever the topic arose, had struck Elena as more evasive than practical, and her curiosity had only grown stronger with each passing day. She waited until most of the staff were occupied with afternoon duties before making her way quietly down the long hallway toward the sealed wooden doors she had noticed on her earlier tour. The doors were heavy but unlocked, creaking softly as Elena pushed them open and stepped into a hallway coated thickly in dust, clearly untouched for a considerable length of time. Unlike the rest of the house, which remained meticulously maintained despite its coldness, this section of Frostmere had been left entirely abandoned, as though sealed away deliberately rather than simply neglected. Elena moved carefully through the dim corridor, noting the covered furniture beneath white sheets, the closed curtains blocking out what little natural light remained. She reached a large door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar, and pushed it open gently, stepping into what appeared to have once been a beautiful sitting room, now frozen in time exactly as it must have been years ago. A woman's belongings remained scattered throughout the room, untouched by time or cleaning. A hairbrush rested on a vanity table, alongside several pieces of jewelry left exactly where they had been placed. Paintings, unfinished, lined one wall, revealing a genuine artistic talent that had clearly belonged to whoever once occupied this space. Elena realized quickly that she had stumbled into what must have been Isabel Blackwood's private chambers, preserved exactly as they had been left, as though Damien could not bring himself to disturb a single object within them. Elena moved carefully toward the vanity table, studying the scattered belongings with a mixture of curiosity and quiet sadness. A small, leather-bound journal caught her attention, resting partially open beside a collection of hairpins. She hesitated only a moment before picking it up gently, flipping carefully through its pages, though she stopped short of reading anything in detail, feeling suddenly as though she were intruding upon something deeply private, something that belonged entirely to a woman long since passed. "You should not be in here." Elena startled, nearly dropping the journal as she turned to find Damien, standing in the doorway, his expression darker and more troubled than she had ever seen it. His gray eyes moved quickly from her face to the journal in her hands, and something flickered across his features that looked remarkably like pain. "I am sorry," Elena said quickly, setting the journal down carefully exactly where she had found it. "I did not intend to intrude. I simply became curious, and Mrs. Pemberton's reluctance to discuss this wing only deepened that curiosity." Damien remained silent for a long moment, his gaze sweeping slowly across the preserved room, as though seeing it fully for the first time in years. "This was her sitting room," he said finally, his voice quieter and more strained than Elena had ever heard it. "I could not bring myself to change anything after she passed. I simply closed the doors and asked everyone to leave it undisturbed." "How long ago did she pass?" Elena asked gently, sensing the fragility of the moment and choosing her words with careful precision. 4 years, Damien said, moving slowly into the room, despite his earlier warning that Elena should not be there. He paused before one of the unfinished paintings, his expression distant and haunted. "She loved to paint. She was quite talented, actually, though she never believed it herself." Elena remained quiet, sensing that pushing further might close this rare, fragile opening entirely. Instead, she simply waited, allowing Damien the space to continue if he chose to. "She died suddenly," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "An illness that came on quickly, and took her before any physician could properly understand what was happening. It was devastating and confusing, and in the aftermath, rumors began to spread. People said terrible things, Duchess. They said I had something to do with her death, that our marriage had been unhappy, that I had wanted her gone for reasons of my own." "Were those rumors true?" Elena asked quietly, watching his face carefully for any sign of deception. Damien's gray eyes lifted to meet hers, filled with a raw, weary pain that Elena had never witnessed from him before. "No," he said firmly, "I loved her, Duchess. In whatever limited way I was capable of loving anyone. Her death nearly destroyed me, and then the rumors that followed destroyed whatever remained. I learned quickly that grief shared with the world only invites more cruelty, more suspicion, more pain layered atop an already unbearable loss. So I stopped sharing anything at all. I built walls, and I have maintained them ever since, because it seemed the only way to survive." Elena felt something shift within her chest, a deep and unexpected empathy, replacing whatever suspicion she had carried regarding her husband's cold exterior. "I am sorry," she said softly. "Truly sorry. For everything you endured, and everything you continue to carry." Damien studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his gray eyes. "Why does that surprise me, Duchess? Sympathy from you, when our marriage was born from nothing more than convenience and necessity." "Perhaps," Elena said carefully, "convenience does not have to remain the entire foundation of what we build together. Perhaps understanding each other, even slowly, even carefully, might allow something more genuine to grow between us." Damien remained silent for a long moment, his expression guarded once more, though something softer lingered beneath the surface that had not been present before their conversation began. "You should leave this room now, Duchess. It grows late, and I have matters requiring my attention." Elena nodded, understanding that whatever door had briefly opened between them had now closed once more, though perhaps not as completely as it had been closed before. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for trusting me with even this much of your history." Damien said nothing further, simply watching as Elena made her way back toward the door, leaving him alone once more within the preserved memory of his first wife's private world. Elena walked slowly back toward her own chamber, her mind swirling with everything she had just learned, every piece of the puzzle shifting into a clearer, more complicated picture than she had previously understood. Over the following days, Elena noticed a subtle shift in Damien's behavior toward her. small and cautious, but undeniably present. He began joining her for breakfast more often, offering brief but genuine conversation, rather than retreating immediately into silence. He asked, once, about her own family, her own history, listening carefully as she spoke of her grandfather and the estate she had grown up loving. He even accompanied her, one afternoon, on a walk through the estate's overgrown gardens, listening quietly as she described her plans to restore them to their former beauty. "You truly wish to restore the gardens?" he asked, studying the tangled growth surrounding them with an expression Elena could not quite decipher. "I do," Elena said, kneeling beside a patch of wild, overgrown roses that had somehow survived years of neglect. "I believe beauty deserves tending, Your Grace, even when it has been forgotten for a time, perhaps especially then." Damien's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary, something warm and unfamiliar flickering briefly behind his usual guarded expression. "Then you have my permission, Duchess, to restore whatever you see fit." Frostmere could use more beauty within its walls. Elena smiled genuinely for the first time since her arrival, feeling something small but significant shifting between them, a fragile bridge slowly forming across the distance that had defined their marriage since its beginning. Whatever secrets and pain still lingered within Frostmere's cold stone walls, Elena began to believe, for the first time, that perhaps something genuine might yet grow between herself and the man she had married, for reasons entirely separate from love. That evening, as Elena prepared for bed, Grace arrived with an unexpected message. "His Grace requests your company in the library, my lady, if you are willing." Elena's heart quickened slightly with surprised curiosity as she made her way downstairs, finding Damien seated near the fireplace, a small stack of books arranged on the table beside him. He rose slightly as she entered, gesturing toward the empty chair across from his own. "I thought perhaps," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar hesitance, "we might share an evening of quiet conversation, rather than simply passing each other in cold silence throughout these halls." Elena settled into the offered chair, warmth spreading through her chest, despite the persistent chill of the house around them. "I would like that very much, Your Grace." They spoke for hours that evening, cautiously at first, then more openly, as trust slowly began building between them, one careful word at a time. Damien spoke of his childhood, his difficult relationship with his own father, the weight of expectation that had shaped him long before Isabel's death had frozen him entirely. Elena spoke of her grandfather's fierce love, disguised as stubbornness, her own fears about facing the world alone, the strange, unexpected relief she now felt at not carrying that burden entirely by herself. By the time the fire had burned low and the hour had grown late, something had shifted permanently between them, a foundation forming beneath what had once been nothing more than a practical arrangement. Elena rose to retire for the evening, and Damien walked her to the base of the staircase, his gray eyes holding hers with something that looked remarkably like genuine warmth. "Good night, Elena," he said softly, using her given name for the first time since they had met. "Good night, Damien," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips as she made her way upstairs, her heart lighter than it had been since the day her grandfather's will had first upended her carefully ordered world. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever secrets Frostmere still held, Elena felt, for the first time, genuine hope that this strange, unexpected marriage might yet become something worth treasuring. Winter arrived at Frostmere with a fierce, sudden force, blanketing the estate in thick white snow that transformed the already pale stone walls into something almost otherworldly. Elena found herself surprised by how quickly she had grown accustomed to the rhythm of her new life, the quiet mornings, the shared breakfasts that had become a genuine habit rather than an obligation, the evenings spent increasingly often in the library rather than in separate, silent solitude. Her relationship with Damien had shifted gradually but steadily over the following weeks. The careful distance that once defined their interactions had softened into something resembling genuine friendship, occasionally punctuated by moments that felt like something even deeper stirring beneath the surface. He still carried his guarded nature, still retreated occasionally into silence when conversation drifted too close to painful memories, but Elena had learned to recognize these moments for what they were, wounds still healing, rather than walls meant to keep her permanently at a distance. The garden restoration had become Elena's particular joy throughout the changing season, though the arriving snow had forced her efforts indoors for the time being. She spent her days instead reorganizing the library, restoring old portraits that had faded with neglect, and slowly, carefully, breathing life back into a house that had spent years frozen in grief. One particularly cold evening, as snow continued falling steadily outside the tall windows, Elena noticed smoke curling unusually thick from the direction of the eastern wing as she made her way toward her chamber. Her heart lurched with sudden alarm, and she hurried toward the source, finding Grace running frantically down the hallway, her face pale with fear. "Fire, my lady!" Grace called out. "In the east wing! Someone left a candle burning too close to the old curtains, and it has caught quickly!" Elena's mind raced immediately to the preserved sitting room, Isabel's private chambers, filled with delicate paintings and irreplaceable memories that Damien had protected so carefully for years. "Where is his Grace?" she demanded. "Already there, my lady, along with several of the staff, but the flames are spreading faster than they can manage alone." Elena did not hesitate, gathering her skirts and running toward the eastern wing, despite Grace's frantic protests for her to remain safely away from danger. She arrived to find thick smoke already filling the preserved hallway, orange flames licking hungrily at old curtains and dry wooden furniture that had sat untouched for years, providing perfect fuel for the rapidly spreading fire. Damien was directing several servants in a desperate effort to control the flames, his usually composed expression replaced by something raw and frantic that Elena had never witnessed from him before. "Elena, get back!" he shouted the moment he noticed her, his voice carrying genuine fear rather than his usual controlled calm. "I can help," Elena insisted, grabbing a nearby bucket despite the thickening smoke burning at her throat. The firefighting continued for what felt like an agonizing eternity. Buckets of water passed hand to hand in a desperate chain, wet blankets thrown over stubborn pockets of flame, until finally, gradually, the fire began to weaken and eventually die away entirely, leaving behind smoke-stained walls and significant damage throughout much of the preserved wing. In the chaos of the effort, Elena had not noticed a falling beam until it was nearly too late, a heavy piece of burning wood collapsing suddenly from the ceiling directly above where she stood. Damien moved with startling speed, shoving her roughly out of harm's way before the beam crashed down exactly where she had been standing moments before, narrowly missing them both, but leaving Damien with a painful gash along his forearm from a sharp, splintered edge. "Damien!" Elena cried out, rushing immediately to his side as he clutched his injured arm, blood seeping steadily through the torn fabric of his sleeve. "I am fine," he insisted through gritted teeth, though his pale expression suggested otherwise. "We need to ensure the fire is fully extinguished first." "The fire is out," Elena said firmly, examining his injury with growing concern, despite the smoke still lingering thick in the air around them. "You need attention immediately, Damien. Please, let me help you." Damien's gray eyes met hers, something raw and vulnerable flickering behind his usual guarded composure. For the first time since Elena had known him, his careful walls seemed to crumble entirely. Exhaustion and pain, and something that looked remarkably like genuine fear, finally breaking through years of careful control. "You could have been killed," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly, as Elena guided him carefully toward a nearby chair, tearing a strip of clean fabric to bind his wound, as best she could manage, if that beam had fallen even a moment sooner. "But it did not," Elena said gently, focusing on binding his wound carefully. "We are both safe, Damien. That is what matters now." Damien remained silent for a long moment, watching as Elena finished tending to his injury with careful, steady hands. When she finally looked up, meeting his gaze directly, she found an intensity there that made her breath catch unexpectedly in her throat. "I could not bear it," he said quietly. "If something happened to you, Elena, I realized that the moment I saw that beam falling toward you, I could not bear losing you, the way I lost her." Elena's heart raced at his admission, understanding instinctively the significance of what he had just revealed. "You are not going to lose me, Damien. I am not going anywhere." "You do not understand," he said, his voice growing rougher with barely contained emotion. "After Isabel died, I convinced myself I would never allow myself to care that deeply again. It seemed the only way to survive the pain of losing someone so completely. And yet here you are, disrupting every careful wall I built around myself, and I find myself utterly unable to stop it from happening." Elena reached forward gently, taking his uninjured hand in both of hers. "Perhaps," she said softly, "some walls are not meant to remain standing forever, Damien. Perhaps allowing yourself to care again is not a betrayal of what you lost, but simply proof that your heart survived, despite everything it endured." Damien studied her for a long, silent moment, something shifting fundamentally behind his gray eyes. Years of careful guardedness slowly giving way to something far more vulnerable and genuine. "I have spent 4 years convincing myself, and everyone around me, that I felt nothing at all," he admitted quietly. "It was easier than facing the alternative, easier than risking further pain. But you have made it increasingly difficult to maintain that pretense, Elena, and I find, rather unexpectedly, that I no longer wish to." Elena's chest tightened with emotion, understanding the significance of what he was offering her, however carefully guarded his words remained. "Then perhaps we do not have to pretend any longer, either of us. Perhaps we can simply allow ourselves to discover whatever this has become, honestly and without fear." Before Damien could respond, Mrs. Pemberton arrived hurriedly, her expression tight with concern as she noticed his injured arm. "Your Grace, you require a physician immediately. That wound needs proper attention." The moment between them dissolved into practical necessity, though something had shifted permanently in its wake. Damien allowed himself to be led toward proper medical care, though his gray eyes lingered on Elena a moment longer before he departed, carrying within them a warmth she had never witnessed from him before that evening. Over the following days, as Damien recovered from his injury, their relationship continued deepening, in ways neither of them had anticipated when their arrangement first began. Conversations lasted longer, laughter began appearing more frequently between them, and small, quiet moments of genuine affection began replacing the careful distance that had once defined their marriage entirely. Yet even as their bond grew stronger, Elena could not shake the lingering questions surrounding Isabel's death, questions that Damien had touched upon only briefly during their conversation in the preserved sitting room. Something about the rumors he had described, the suspicion that had once surrounded him, continued nagging at the edges of her mind, especially now that she understood how deeply those old wounds still affected him. One afternoon, while helping oversee repairs to the damaged eastern wing, Elena discovered an old letter tucked carefully within a hidden drawer of Isabel's vanity table, previously overlooked during the initial fire cleanup. The letter, addressed to Isabel from an unfamiliar name, Edmund Gray, hinted at tensions Elena had not previously known existed, references to disputed inheritance and simmering resentment that seemed to predate Isabel's mysterious passing by several months. Elena hesitated only briefly before deciding to bring the letter directly to Damien, understanding intuitively that whatever it revealed, honesty between them now mattered more than protecting him from potentially painful revelations. "I found this while overseeing the repairs," she said carefully, presenting the letter to Damien later that evening as they sat together in the library. "I believe it may be relevant to understanding what truly happened to Isabel." Damien's expression tightened as he read through the letter carefully, his jaw clenching with barely restrained emotion. "Edmund Gray," he said quietly, "Isabel's younger brother. He never forgave me for what he perceived as an unfair distribution of the family inheritance following their father's passing. He believed Isabel's marriage to me had unfairly excluded him from wealth he felt entitled to." "Do you believe he had something to do with her death?" Elena asked carefully. Damien's gray eyes lifted slowly, meeting hers with a troubled, uncertain expression. "I do not know, Elena. At the time, I was too consumed by grief to properly investigate such suspicions. But now, reading this letter again, I begin to wonder if perhaps I overlooked something significant in my desperate desire simply to move past the pain entirely." Elena reached forward, taking his hand gently in her own. "Then perhaps it is time we uncovered the truth together, Damien. Whatever it reveals, you deserve finally to understand what truly happened to Isabel, and to put these old, painful rumors to rest once and for all." Damien studied her for a long moment, something resolute finally settling behind his troubled gray eyes. "Together then," he said quietly, gripping her hand with a firmness that spoke of genuine partnership rather than mere convenience. "Whatever we uncover, we shall face it as one, Elena. Not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners, bound by something far more genuine." Elena smiled softly, understanding the significance of the moment. The fragile trust, now solidifying between them, into something that felt remarkably close to genuine love. Whatever dangers or revelations awaited them as they pursued the truth behind Isabel's death, Elena felt confident, for the first time, that she and Damien would face them together, their once cold arrangement having transformed gradually into something far warmer and far more enduring than either of them had ever anticipated. The following morning, Damien sent word to Mr. Whitfield, requesting any records the family lawyer might hold regarding Isabel's final months, along with any correspondence related to Edmund Gray and the disputed inheritance mentioned in the letter Elena had discovered. While they waited for a response, Elena and Damien began their own quiet investigation, questioning members of the household staff who had served at Frostmere during Isabel's final days. Mrs. Pemberton proved reluctant at first, clearly uncomfortable revisiting memories she had spent years trying to bury alongside her former mistress. Yet as Elena gently pressed, explaining their genuine desire to finally understand the truth rather than simply reopen old wounds, the housekeeper's resistance slowly began to soften. "There was tension, my lady, in those final months," Mrs. Pemberton admitted quietly, settling into a chair within the drawing room as she finally allowed herself to speak openly. "Master Edmund visited more frequently than usual, and his visits often ended in raised voices, though I never learned precisely what caused the disagreements. Her Grace seemed increasingly troubled during that time, distracted and anxious, in ways quite unlike her usual cheerful nature." "Did she ever mention what troubled her specifically?" Damien asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the evident tension in his shoulders. Mrs. Pemberton hesitated before answering. "Only once, Your Grace, shortly before she passed. She mentioned feeling unwell more frequently than usual, complaining of headaches and fatigue that seemed to worsen after Master Edmund's visits. I assumed it was simply the stress of family tension affecting her health, but now, considering everything that followed, I wonder if perhaps there was something more sinister occurring." Elena exchanged a troubled glance with Damien, the implication of Mrs. Pemberton's words settling heavily between them. "Are you suggesting," Elena asked carefully, "that Edmund Gray may have done something to intentionally harm her?" "I do not know for certain, my lady," Mrs. Pemberton admitted. "But the timing of her illness, coinciding so closely with his visits, has always troubled me deeply, though I never felt it was my place to voice such suspicions aloud." That afternoon, a response arrived from Mr. Whitfield, containing several old letters and financial records that shed further troubling light on the situation. According to the documents, Edmund Gray had accumulated substantial debts in the years leading up to Isabel's death, debts that he had repeatedly attempted to resolve by pressuring his sister for additional funds beyond her already generous allowance. "He was desperate," Damien said grimly, studying the financial records spread across his desk. "Desperate enough, perhaps, to consider drastic measures if Isabel refused to continue funding his reckless spending. But surely," Elena said carefully, "desperation alone does not prove he caused her death. We need more concrete evidence before making such a serious accusation." Damien nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "You are right, of course. We must proceed carefully, gathering whatever proof exists before confronting him directly. An accusation without solid evidence would only invite further scandal and suspicion, potentially directed unfairly back toward myself, exactly as it did 4 years ago." Over the following days, Elena and Damien continued their careful investigation, uncovering additional correspondence between Isabel and her physician that revealed troubling details about her final illness. The physician's notes described symptoms that seemed inconsistent with any illness he had previously encountered, symptoms that worsened specifically following visits from her brother, exactly as Mrs. Pemberton had described. "This physician, Dr. Alden, is still practicing in the nearby village," Damien said, studying the old notes carefully. "Perhaps he retains clearer memories of Isabel's final months, memories that might shed additional light on what truly happened." They visited Dr. Alden together the following afternoon, finding him an elderly but sharp-minded man who remembered Isabel's case with surprising clarity, despite the years that had passed. "I always found her illness peculiar," he admitted, once Damien explained the reason for their visit. "The symptoms did not align neatly with any illness I had previously treated. Had modern understanding of certain poisons existed more thoroughly during that period, I might have investigated further. As it stood, I attributed her death to an unidentified illness, though I confess the diagnosis never fully satisfied my own medical instincts." "Do you believe?" Elena asked carefully, That she may have been poisoned? Dr. Alden considered the question seriously before responding. It is possible, my lady. Certain poisons, administered gradually over time, can produce symptoms remarkably similar to those Her Grace experienced: fatigue, headaches, gradual weakening of the body, followed eventually by sudden collapse. I did not consider such a possibility fully at the time, given the circumstances and lack of clear evidence, but revisiting my old notes now, I cannot entirely dismiss the theory. The revelation struck Damien visibly hard, his expression tightening with a mixture of grief and growing anger. If Edmund poisoned her, he said quietly once they had left the doctor's residence, then he must be held accountable, regardless of how long ago it occurred, or how difficult proving such a crime might prove. We will find the proof, Elena said firmly, taking his hand supportively. Together, Damien. Whatever it takes. Their investigation continued over the following weeks, gathering testimony from additional witnesses, examining old financial records more carefully, and slowly piecing together a troubling picture that increasingly suggested Edmund Gray's involvement in his own sister's death. Yet even as evidence accumulated, both Elena and Damien understood that formally accusing a member of the nobility of such a serious crime would require irrefutable proof, evidence strong enough to withstand the scrutiny and skepticism such an accusation would inevitably invite. Throughout this difficult period, Elena noticed their own relationship continuing to deepen despite the heavy burden of their investigation. Damien relied increasingly on her steady presence and careful reasoning, sharing his fears and frustrations openly, in ways he had never done with anyone since Isabel's passing. Elena, in turn, found herself falling more genuinely in love with the complex, guarded man she had married, for reasons entirely separate from affection, discovering beneath his cold exterior a depth of loyalty and feeling she had never expected to find. One quiet evening, as they reviewed their accumulated evidence together in the study, Damien looked up suddenly, his gray eyes studying Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. I do not know how to properly express this, he said softly, given everything we have endured together these past months, but I find myself grateful beyond words that you came into my life. Elena, however unconventional the circumstances of our meeting. Elena's heart swelled with emotion at his admission. I am equally grateful, Damien. Whatever challenges brought us together, I would not change a single moment of what has grown between us since. Their conversation was interrupted, however, by an unexpected knock at the study door. Mrs. Pemberton entered, her expression tight with concern. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, but a visitor has arrived, quite unannounced. He claims urgent business regarding matters related to the late Duchess. Damien's expression shifted immediately, tension replacing the warmth that had briefly softened his features. Who is this visitor? Mrs. Pemberton hesitated only a moment before answering. He gives his name as Edmund Gray, Your Grace. Elena felt her chest tighten with sudden apprehension, exchanging a troubled glance with Damien, as the weight of their ongoing investigation suddenly collided directly with the man they suspected might be responsible for Isabel's death. Whatever careful plans they had formed regarding how to eventually confront him, it seemed fate had chosen this moment instead, leaving them little time to prepare for whatever confrontation awaited them within the very walls of their own home. Edmund Gray stood in the drawing room when Elena and Damien entered together, his posture relaxed and confident in a manner that struck Elena immediately as arrogant rather than genuinely at ease. He was a tall man, sharply dressed, with features that vaguely echoed Isabel's portrait, though his eyes carried none of the warmth Elena had noticed in his late sister's painted expression. Damien, Edmund said smoothly, offering a shallow bow that felt more mocking than respectful. It has been quite some time, and this must be your new Duchess. I confess, the rumors of your sudden marriage reached even my distant corner of the county rather quickly. Edmund, Damien replied coolly, his voice carefully controlled despite the tension radiating from his rigid posture. What business brings you to Frostmere so unexpectedly? Edmund's smile did not waver, though something calculating flickered behind his gaze as he studied them both carefully. I heard troubling rumors, old friend, that you have been investigating matters best left buried in the past. Reopening questions about dear Isabel's passing, questions that were settled quite thoroughly 4 years ago. Some questions, Damien said evenly, deserve more thorough answers than they originally received. Edmund's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, though he maintained his composed facade. I understand grief can lead people toward unproductive speculation, Damien, particularly when combined with the pressures of a new, hastily arranged marriage. But I would caution you against pursuing baseless theories that could only bring further scandal upon our families. Are you concerned about scandal? Elena interjected calmly. Or are you concerned about what such an investigation might reveal, Mr. Gray? Edmund's gaze shifted toward Elena, something sharp and dangerous flickering briefly behind his controlled expression, before he composed himself once more. I am concerned, Duchess, about baseless accusations damaging reputations that have already suffered enough following Isabel's tragic passing. I would think you, of all people, given your own family's precarious situation, might understand the value of protecting one's reputation from unfounded rumors. The implied threat in his words was unmistakable, and Elena felt Damien tense beside her, though he maintained his composed exterior with visible effort. Is that a threat, Edmund? Merely an observation, Edmund replied smoothly, regarding the fragility of reputations, and how easily rumors can spread in either direction, damaging whoever they choose to target. If you have nothing to hide, Damien said firmly, then such an investigation should not concern you in the slightest. Edmund's composed mask slipped slightly, revealing a flash of genuine anger before he quickly regained control. I came here as a courtesy, Damien, to warn you against pursuing a path that will only bring further pain to everyone involved, including yourself. But if you insist on continuing this reckless investigation, do not be surprised when it invites consequences you are unprepared to face. With that, Edmund turned and departed without further ceremony, leaving Elena and Damien standing together in tense, troubled silence within the drawing room. He knows something, Elena said quietly once Edmund had gone. His reaction only confirms our suspicions, Damien. Agreed, Damien replied grimly. But knowing he is guilty, and proving it conclusively, remain two very different challenges. We must proceed even more carefully now, understanding that Edmund will likely attempt to protect himself by whatever means necessary. Their concerns proved justified sooner than expected. Within days, disturbing rumors began circulating throughout the county, whispers suggesting that Damien had married Elena hastily, not out of practical necessity, but to distract from renewed suspicions regarding Isabel's death. Other rumors suggested that Elena herself had somehow orchestrated the marriage specifically to gain access to Frostmere's wealth, implying a calculated scheme, rather than genuine partnership. He is trying to discredit us both, Elena said one evening, reading through a particularly cruel letter from a distant acquaintance repeating these damaging rumors, turning society's suspicion back toward us, exactly as he threatened. Damien's expression darkened with barely restrained anger. Then we must move quickly, Elena, before these rumors cause irreparable damage to both our reputations and our ongoing investigation. Their next crucial breakthrough arrived unexpectedly through Mr. Whitfield, who discovered additional financial records revealing that Edmund had purchased a significant quantity of a rare, difficult-to-detect poison from an apothecary in London shortly before Isabel's death, using a false name that nonetheless matched his known handwriting and a distinctive signature flourish he had used throughout his life. This is the proof we need, Damien said, studying the documents with grim satisfaction mixed with renewed grief. Combined with Dr. Alden's testimony and the financial motive established through his mounting debts, this evidence should prove sufficient to bring formal charges against him. We must proceed carefully, Elena cautioned. Edmund has already shown he is willing to spread damaging rumors to protect himself. We need to ensure this evidence reaches proper authorities before he has opportunity to destroy it or flee entirely. Together, they arranged a private meeting with the county magistrate, presenting their carefully gathered evidence with the assistance of Mr. Whitfield's legal expertise. The magistrate, a serious and thorough man, agreed that the evidence warranted formal investigation, promising to proceed with appropriate discretion while gathering additional confirmation before any public accusation could be made. Word of the impending investigation reached Edmund faster than anyone anticipated, and his response proved swift and desperate. Rather than fleeing as Elena had feared, he instead launched a more aggressive campaign of rumors, appearing at a social gathering that Elena and Damien attended together, loudly proclaiming his innocence, while subtly suggesting that Damien himself had fabricated evidence out of guilt over his own suspected involvement in Isabel's death. He grows desperate, Damien observed quietly, as they watched Edmund holding court among a small group of society members, his voice carrying just loudly enough to ensure his accusations reached as many ears as possible. Desperate men often make careless mistakes. That mistake arrived sooner than expected. During his impassioned speech proclaiming his innocence, Edmund inadvertently revealed specific details about Isabel's final illness that had never been publicly disclosed, details that only someone directly involved in causing her death could possibly have known. Dr. Alden, present at the gathering by fortunate coincidence, immediately recognized the significance of this slip, quietly informing the magistrate's assistant, who happened to also be in attendance. Within days, formal charges were brought against Edmund Gray, supported by the accumulated evidence Elena and Damien had so carefully gathered, along with his own careless admission during the social gathering. Facing overwhelming evidence and the very real possibility of conviction, Edmund eventually confessed to poisoning his sister gradually over several months, driven by desperation to prevent her from cutting off his access to family funds after learning of his reckless gambling debts. The revelation shocked county society, quickly shifting public sympathy back toward Damien, who had suffered years of unfounded suspicion regarding a crime he had nothing whatsoever to do with. Elena watched with quiet satisfaction as the truth finally emerged, understanding the profound relief it brought her husband, finally freeing him from 4 years of guilt and suspicion that had never rightfully belonged to him. "It is over," Damien said quietly, standing beside Elena in the estate gardens following Edmund's formal conviction, snow beginning to melt beneath the first warm signs of approaching spring. "After 4 years, the truth has finally emerged, and Isabel can finally rest, knowing justice has been served on her behalf." Elena took his hand gently, feeling the significant weight finally lifting from his shoulders. "You are free now, Damien, truly free, from guilt that was never rightfully yours to carry." Damien turned to face her fully, his gray eyes holding an emotion Elena had never witnessed from him before, warm and open, and utterly without the guarded coldness that had once defined every interaction between them. "I could not have uncovered this truth without you, Elena. Your courage, your persistence, your refusal to accept easy answers, it saved me from continuing to carry a burden that was slowly destroying whatever remained of my heart." "We saved each other," Elena said softly, reaching up to gently touch his face. "That has been true since the very beginning of this strange, unexpected journey we have shared together." Spring arrived at Frostmere fully within a matter of weeks, transforming the once cold, gray estate into something Elena scarcely recognized from her first visit months earlier. The gardens she had worked so tirelessly to restore burst into vibrant color, roses climbing along freshly repaired trellises, tulips lining the pathways she had carefully redesigned throughout the winter months. Even the house itself seemed to have shed some of its persistent chill, sunlight now streaming freely through curtains that Elena had gradually replaced throughout the many rooms she had slowly made her own. News of Edmund Gray's conviction had spread thoroughly throughout county society, and with it came a remarkable shift in how people regarded Damien. The whispers that once painted him as cold and possibly dangerous had transformed into sympathy and admiration for a man who had endured years of unjust suspicion with quiet dignity, finally vindicated by evidence he and his new duchess had painstakingly uncovered together. Invitations began arriving at Frostmere with increasing frequency, society eager now to include the Duke and Duchess in gatherings they had previously avoided entirely. Elena watched with quiet amusement as Damien navigated this sudden shift in social standing, still guarded in many ways, but increasingly willing to engage with the world beyond Frostmere's walls, now that the shadow of suspicion had finally lifted from his shoulders. "You seem different lately," Charlotte observed one afternoon, visiting Frostmere for the first time since the wedding, her eyes bright with genuine happiness as she studied her cousin's transformed demeanor. "Happier, Elena, in a way I have not seen since before your grandfather's passing." Elena smiled warmly, glancing toward the window where she could see Damien working alongside the gardening staff, a task he had begun joining more frequently since witnessing Elena's dedication to restoring the estate's neglected beauty. "I am happier, Charlotte, happier than I ever expected to become, given how this entire arrangement began." "I confess," Charlotte said, following Elena's gaze toward the garden below, "I worried terribly when you first proposed this marriage. A cold duke, a business arrangement born from desperation rather than genuine affection. I feared you were sacrificing your own happiness simply to save the estate." "I feared the same thing initially," Elena admitted. "But sometimes, Charlotte, The most unexpected arrangements grow into something far more beautiful than we ever anticipated. Damien is not the cold, distant man society once believed him to be. He is thoughtful and loyal, and capable of a depth of feeling I never expected to discover beneath his guarded exterior. As if summoned by their conversation, Damien appeared at the drawing room door, his clothing slightly dirtied from his gardening efforts, though his expression carried a warmth entirely absent during Elena's first visit to Frostmere so many months earlier. "Forgive the interruption," he said, offering Charlotte a genuine smile that would have seemed impossible from the cold, distant Duke County society once whispered about. "I wondered if I might steal my wife away for a moment, if you would not mind, Miss Ashworth." Charlotte's eyebrows rose slightly, with pleasant surprise at his easy, warm demeanor. "Of course, Your Grace. I shall entertain myself admiring these lovely gardens Elena has told me so much about." Damien led Elena out into the fresh spring air, guiding her toward a quiet corner of the garden where a small, newly planted rosebush had begun showing its first delicate buds. "I wanted to show you this," he said softly, gesturing toward the young plant. "I planted it myself, actually, though I confess I required considerable guidance from your gardening staff to manage it properly." Elena studied the small rosebush with genuine curiosity. "It is lovely, Damien, but why this particular spot?" "This is where Isabel's favorite roses once grew," he explained quietly, before neglect claimed them following her passing. "I thought it fitting, somehow, to plant something new here, honoring her memory, while also representing the new beginning you have brought into my life." Elena's heart swelled with emotion at the thoughtful gesture, understanding the profound significance of what he was sharing with her. "It is a beautiful tribute, Damien, truly." Damien turned to face her fully, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch, exactly as it had during their very first meeting so many months earlier, though now that intensity carried warmth rather than cold, guarded distance. "Elena, I have spent these past months slowly rediscovering parts of myself I believed had died alongside Isabel. Warmth, hope, the capacity to genuinely care for another person, without immediately fearing the pain such feelings might eventually bring. I owe that transformation entirely to you." "Damien," Elena began, though he gently pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her tender response before continuing. "Please, allow me to finish," he said softly. "When you first arrived at Frostmere, proposing this marriage of convenience, I genuinely believed I was incapable of ever again experiencing anything beyond practical partnership. I built my entire existence around that cold, protective belief, convinced it was the only way to survive the pain of losing Isabel so suddenly, followed by years of unjust suspicion that nearly destroyed whatever remained of my spirit." Elena remained quiet, sensing the significance of this moment, allowing him the space to fully express whatever he needed to share. "But you," Damien continued, his voice growing thick with genuine emotion, "you refused to accept the cold, distant version of myself that I presented to the world. You saw through every wall I constructed, every careful barrier meant to keep everyone at a safe, protected distance. You pursued truth and justice on my behalf, even when doing so put your own reputation at risk. You restored beauty to a house that had grown cold and neglected, exactly as you restored warmth and hope to a heart I believed had frozen permanently." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes as she listened to his heartfelt admission, understanding fully the magnitude of what he was expressing. "Damien, you have given me equally as much throughout this journey. You saved my family's estate, protected everyone who depends upon it, and slowly revealed a depth of character and genuine kindness that society never properly recognized." "What I am trying to say, Elena," Damien continued, taking both her hands gently in his own, "is that what began as a practical arrangement between two strangers has transformed, at least for myself, into something far deeper and more meaningful than I ever believed possible. I love you, Elena. Genuinely, completely, in a way I feared I would never experience again after losing Isabel." Elena's heart soared at his declaration, tears now falling freely down her cheeks, as genuine joy overwhelmed her entirely. "I love you too, Damien. I have for some time now, though I confess I feared voicing such feelings, uncertain whether you were ready to hear them." Damien's expression softened further, genuine happiness replacing the guarded distance that had once defined his every interaction. "I am more than ready, Elena. I have been ready for quite some time, though my own fears kept me from expressing it sooner. He leaned forward slowly, giving Elena ample opportunity to step away if she chose, though she remained perfectly still, meeting him halfway, as their lips finally met in a tender, genuine kiss that carried none of the careful distance that had once defined their entire relationship. When they finally parted, both were smiling genuinely, the warmth between them undeniable and thoroughly transformed from the cold, practical arrangement that had first brought them together. "Word will spread quickly throughout the county," Elena said softly, resting her head gently against his shoulder as they stood together among the newly blooming garden. The cold Duke of Frostmere, genuinely and openly in love with his Duchess. "I imagine society will find that quite the scandal, given your previous reputation." Damien chuckled softly, an unfamiliar but genuinely joyful sound that Elena had rarely heard from him before this moment. "Let them talk, Elena. I care little what society believes any longer, so long as I have you standing beside me. What began as your grandfather's impossible demand has become the truest, most meaningful choice of my entire life." As spring continued blossoming fully around Frostmere, the estate itself seemed to reflect the profound transformation occurring within its walls. Cold stone gradually giving way to warmth, neglect giving way to careful restoration, and a marriage born entirely from desperate necessity, blossoming unexpectedly into genuine, enduring love. Elena Ashworth, once faced with an impossible 30-day deadline that threatened everything she held dear, had found not merely a solution to her grandfather's demanding will, but a partnership deeper and more meaningful than she ever could have imagined when she first walked uninvited through Frostmere's imposing front doors, prepared to negotiate a business arrangement with the man society called cold, but whom she now knew to be capable of the deepest, most genuine love imaginable. A full year passed following Edmund Gray's conviction, and Frostmere had changed so thoroughly that visitors who remembered the estate from before Elena's arrival often remarked they scarcely recognized the place. The gardens now bloomed in full, vibrant glory each season. The halls echoed with genuine laughter rather than uneasy silence, and the once distant, guarded Duke had become known throughout the county as a devoted, attentive husband, his transformation the subject of admiring gossip rather than suspicious whispers. Elena discovered she was carrying their first child during the early days of that second spring, a revelation that filled Frostmere with fresh excitement and anticipation. Damien, who had once believed himself incapable of experiencing genuine joy again, found himself overwhelmed with a happiness so profound it occasionally left him momentarily speechless, staring at Elena with wonder whenever she mentioned the small, growing life they had created together. "I never imagined," he admitted one evening, resting his hand gently against Elena's gradually rounding stomach as they sat together near the fireplace, "that I would experience this feeling again. The anticipation, the hope, the fear of loving something so completely and vulnerably. I thought that part of myself had died alongside Isabel. And yet here you are," Elena said softly, covering his hand with her own, feeling it fully once more. Their happiness, however, faced one final challenge that autumn, when word arrived that Edmund Gray, having served a portion of his sentence, had lodged a formal appeal, claiming new evidence existed that might overturn his conviction entirely. The news struck Frostmere like a sudden, unwelcome storm, threatening to reopen wounds that had only recently begun healing properly. "He cannot possibly have new evidence," Damien said, pacing the length of his study with barely restrained frustration upon hearing the news from Mr. Whitfield. He confessed openly, in front of numerous witnesses, what possible defense remains available to him now. Mr. Whitfield, though sympathetic, remained cautious in his response. "Appeals of this nature are rarely successful, Your Grace, but the legal process demands we take the claim seriously regardless. Edmund has apparently secured new legal counsel, a man known for finding technical loopholes within otherwise solid cases. We must prepare accordingly." Elena, despite the worry evident on her husband's face, remained remarkably composed. "We have faced far greater challenges together already, Damien. We uncovered the truth once, through patience and careful investigation. If Edmund believes he can somehow escape justice through clever legal maneuvering, we shall simply prove him wrong once more." Their renewed investigation revealed quickly that Edmund's claimed new evidence amounted to nothing more than a desperate, poorly constructed argument suggesting Dr. Alden's original testimony had been coerced or exaggerated. However, when Damien and Elena visited the elderly doctor once more, he proved entirely unwavering in his original account, offering additional written testimony that further solidified the case against Edmund's increasingly desperate claims. "He grows more foolish with each passing month," Damien observed, following their productive visit with Dr. Alden. "Perhaps prison has clouded his judgment, or perhaps desperation simply reveals a man's true character more clearly than comfort ever could." The formal appeal hearing took place several weeks later, presided over by a stern, experienced judge who listened carefully to both sides before ultimately dismissing Edmund's claims entirely, citing the overwhelming original evidence and the transparently weak nature of his supposed new defense. Edmund's sentence remained fully intact, and with this final legal challenge resolved, Elena and Damien finally felt the last lingering shadow from that painful chapter of their lives dissipate entirely. "It is truly finished now," Elena said quietly, standing beside Damien outside the courthouse, following the hearing's conclusion, relief washing visibly over both their expressions. "No more appeals, no more lingering doubts. Justice has been served completely and finally." Damien wrapped his arm gently around her shoulders, careful of her now significantly rounded stomach, their first child due to arrive within mere weeks. "Completely finished, Elena. We can finally focus entirely on the future awaiting us, rather than continuing to look backward toward old pain and unresolved suspicion." That future arrived sooner than either of them anticipated, their daughter born early one crisp winter morning, her arrival filling Frostmere with a joy so profound that even the household staff, long accustomed to the estate's previous coldness, found themselves moved to genuine celebration. They named her Isabel Charlotte Blackwood, honoring both Damien's beloved first wife, whose memory he had finally found peace with, and Elena's devoted cousin, who had supported her through every uncertain step of this remarkable journey. Watching Damien hold their infant daughter for the first time, tears of genuine joy streaming freely down his face, Elena understood fully the profound transformation that had occurred within him since their unconventional marriage began. The cold, distant Duke of Frostmere, once believed by county society to be incapable of genuine warmth or affection, had become instead a devoted husband and father, his heart having healed completely from years of unjust suspicion and genuine grief. "She has your eyes," Damien observed softly, gazing down at their daughter with wonder evident in his expression. "That same fierce determination I noticed the very first day you walked uninvited into my drawing room, prepared to negotiate an impossible arrangement." Elena laughed softly, exhaustion from childbirth mingling pleasantly with overwhelming happiness. "I hope she inherits your patience as well, Damien, and your capacity for genuine, enduring love, once you finally allow yourself to embrace it fully." As the years continued unfolding at Frostmere, the estate flourished increasingly under their combined care, gardens blooming ever more vibrant each passing season, additional children eventually joining their growing family, and county society gradually forgetting entirely the cold, distant reputation that had once defined Damien Blackwood so thoroughly. Instead, Frostmere became known throughout the region as a warm, welcoming estate, its Duke and Duchess celebrated widely for their genuine devotion to each other and to the many tenants and staff who depended upon their continued care and guidance. Elena often reflected, during quiet evenings spent together with Damien near the fireplace, on the strange, unexpected journey that had brought them together. Her grandfather's impossible demand, delivered through a will she had once believed cruel and unreasonable, had ultimately guided her toward a happiness she never could have anticipated through any conventional courtship. Perhaps her grandfather had understood something profound that Elena herself had not initially recognized, that genuine partnership, built patiently through honesty and shared adversity, could ultimately prove far more enduring and meaningful than any romance born from fleeting infatuation alone. "Do you ever wonder," Elena asked one quiet evening, watching their children play contentedly near the fire while Damien read beside her, "what our lives might have become had I never walked through your door that first difficult day?" Damien considered the question thoughtfully before responding, setting aside his book to focus entirely on Elena. "I imagine I would have remained exactly as I was, Elena, cold, guarded, convinced I had permanently lost my capacity for genuine happiness. You changed everything the moment you entered my life, however unconventional our beginning may have been. Grandfather always did have peculiar wisdom hidden beneath his stubborn demands," Elena said, smiling warmly as she leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching their children's carefree laughter fill the once cold and silent halls of Frostmere. Perhaps he understood, even then, that sometimes the most impossible circumstances lead us toward exactly the life we were always meant to discover. Damien pressed a gentle kiss against her forehead, his heart full with a contentment he had once believed forever beyond his reach. Whatever wisdom guided us here, Elena, I remain endlessly grateful for the path that brought you into my life. 30 days to find a husband, transformed into a lifetime of genuine, enduring love, precisely the outcome neither of us dared to imagine when this remarkable journey first began. Together, they watched the fire crackle softly before them, their children's laughter echoing warmly throughout halls that had once known only silence and cold, distant grief. Frostmere, once a house frozen entirely in sorrow and suspicion, had become instead a genuine home, filled completely with warmth, laughter, and a love neither Elena nor Damien had ever anticipated discovering when their unconventional arrangement first began, proving that sometimes the coldest beginnings can eventually blossom into the warmest, most enduring happiness imaginable.